Hello, my name's Kate Cooper. I'm Head of Research, Policy and Standards at the Institute of Leadership and Management, and I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you today about appreciating diversity. At the Institute, we recognise leadership to be multidimensional. At its heart is the authenticity, the personal attributes and qualities of the leader. Being trustworthy, having integrity, knowing your values and being able to stand up for them. Leaders, of course, also need to have a vision. They want to know what the future might look like and to encourage others to help them create that future. But leadership is a lot more than a collection of individual attributes and a plan for what they'd like to happen. Leaders have to deliver results. They have to own those results, particularly when they're failures, because one has to learn from mistakes and take responsibility for them. But it's the dimension of collaboration that we'll be focusing on today. And collaboration is so much more than teamwork. There's 11 components that we recognise as contributing to collaborative leadership. Dealing with conflict, I've already mentioned it's more than working in a team. Being able to network, to negotiate, to manage relationship with customers. You can see all collaboration involves working with others. And that appreciation of diversity means that we can work with anybody. So a collaborative leader is inclusive and sensitive to the needs of others. And these are words that we're probably all familiar with. But what does that really mean? How is one inclusive? How do you appreciate diversity? And we recognise 3 items here. An understanding of what inclusivity means, what social sensitivity means, and a recognition of the role and importance of unconscious bias. Jennifer Brown gives us this great definition because sometimes people use diversity and inclusivity interchangeably and we perhaps think we're talking about the same things. So she says, well, diversity is the who and the what. Who's sitting at the table? Who's being recruited? Who's being promoted? Whereas inclusion, on the other hand, is how those things happen. It's the behaviours, it's what we do in order to welcome and embrace diversity. We're aware of protected characteristics. There are 9 of them. I'll talk about them in a little bit more detail in a minute. And we also, I think, know that we shouldn't discriminate against people on the basis of those characteristics. And we know we can't say you can't have a job because you're a woman, or we're not giving you this job because you have a disability. I think that's well known, but indirect discrimination can exist where it appears that we're not directly discriminating, but we've created a policy in our organisation that actually the result is it excludes a group of people. In the same conversations about discrimination, whether direct or indirect, we hear about harassment, the victimising of somebody because of their particular protected characteristic is the reason that somebody in an organisation will be harassed. So they will be picked on because of that particular characteristic. We did research last year into workplace banter and found that many people find banter very upsetting, very offensive, and it does make them feel harassed and indeed victimised. So whenever an individual is being singled out for unfair treatment because of a protected characteristic, we are harassing them or we're victimising them. And they, just as with any more straightforward, more easily understandable discriminatory behaviour, it's against the law. So what are those protected characteristics? Age is one, being pregnant, your religious belief or even a lack of, whether you're a male or female, man or woman, you can't be discriminated on those grounds. Disability has been expanded recently to include mental health conditions as well, and also new is the recognition of people who are transsexual. We can't discriminate against people on the basis of their being married or in a partnership. We can't discriminate against people on the basis of their race or ethnicity. or their sexual orientation. But most of us understand about these characteristics and also understand there's no place for this sort of discrimination in the workplace. But inclusive leaders do far more than just understanding and abiding by the letter of the law. They're aware of their own biases. They look out for different views and perspectives because they see diversity as a talent source. It's making us better than other less diverse organisations because we have better understanding of customers, we have better understanding of markets, and we're going to be more innovative. When we know the benefits of diversity, why is it that organisations still fail to be inclusive places? Well, if we look at recruitment processes, most popular way still of recruiting is the interview, and we often look for people that we like or we feel comfortable with, and invariably that is going to be people like ourselves. So we are going to be almost immediately inclined to look for people like us because of conscious and unconscious biases. It's also the case that sometimes people appear to be like us because they don't want to be different, they don't want to stand out, they want to conform in order to fit in. And when the majority are like us, as it were, it's very difficult to be a lone voice, to stand up for difference, because organisations are social settings, and on the whole, most of us want to fit in, want to be liked. So if we are committed to building an inclusive culture, we have to think about that right from the beginning. How do we recruit? How do we promote people? How are our teams going to reflect society as a whole? How do we include people in the internal processes? Where do we go for information? How do we encourage people to contribute to decisions? Who goes on the training programs? Who gets the high-profile opportunities to succeed? Create situations where people make relationships with people who are not like them. Buddying systems is a great way of doing that. Actually seeking out difference. And of course, when people get to know each other, the differences become less and less, and the things they have in common become more and more. When you have social occasions, perhaps think about who isn't going, who's being left out, and don't see that as a personal choice. That's a failure if people repeatedly don't want to get involved in the social aspects of work. Because on the whole, as I said, everybody has a need for some level of inclusion. Social intelligence is really that understanding of how to operate in a group. And as I said, organisations are very social places, and we know that the culture, the temperature, the climate of organisations changes from team to team and department to department. So it's being able to recognise what works in what social situation and adapting your behaviour to the situation you find yourself in, rather than expecting the situation or a lot of other people to adapt to you, because of course that's not going to happen. So when you are with groups that appear different, then know that the onus is on you to do the understanding and the adapting. I mentioned at the beginning how important it is to be aware of unconscious bias, but it's a difficult one, because if it was conscious, it wouldn't be unconscious, would it? So a bias that happens automatically, and it's all outside of our control, as Silvana's story says here. It's our brain making quick judgments and assessments of people and situations, which is often really useful, because it can save us keep us safe in many situations. But those biases are not always rational, because they are influenced by our own backgrounds, our own cultural environment, and our personal experience. So why are they a problem? Well, having unsubstantiated prejudices and opinions is immediately a problem. People building opinions on the basis of hearsay, anecdotal evidence, unsubstantiated views of other people's that are repeated and then sort of presented as facts. And then we start reacting automatically to people in situations which you can see isn't fair, it's not really rational, and it's often wildly inaccurate, and therefore is very limiting in terms of how we form relationships with other people. So what do we do to overcome unconscious bias? Well, one way is to write down the reasons that we arrive at judgments about people and situations. What was really going on? What was informing our beliefs, those snap judgments that we make? And then start questioning them. Why did we think that? What do we think that's telling us? Where is the history of that idea within us? Look to talk to people not like you. And that, of course, is quite difficult because, as I said when I talked about interviewing, our natural reaction is to be comfortable with people, is to want to find things in common and for them to be like us. Oh, yes, they're like us, we understand them. So deliberately choosing to talk to people who are not like us is going to involve, initially, maybe a degree of discomfort. But one way we can certainly find out about what other people are doing, why they're different, what they're telling us about ourselves that we didn't know before, because often it's an outsider's view looking in that's really informative and useful, is by read different newspapers, journals, listen to different radio channels, watch different TV stations. And Jennifer Brown leaves us with a final thought here about great leadership. So if you are a great leader for inclusion, you've figured out how to embrace and galvanise diversity of voices and identities. If I could have my wish, every leader would say, where is the diversity in this conversation? So Jennifer Brown is encouraging us to keep asking, where's the difference coming from? How are we making those different views welcome and part of the everyday? Here are the references that we've used to make this PowerPoint. And of course, if you're not a member, I'd encourage you, visit our website, find out more, because it really is a great value membership.